It was the end. That's what the vet said when they brought in the lifeless Bobcat, its once fierce spirit seemingly extinguished forever. But sometimes, when all hope seems lost, life finds a way to surprise us with miracles that defy all expectations. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The rain lashed against Lena Whitmore's windshield as she navigated the winding mountain roads of Sugarfern Ridge. Her weathered hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, while beside her, wrapped in a faded blue towel inside a cardboard box, Maisie lay frighteningly still. 17 years of companionship had made the elderly cat's labored breathing unbearable to hear. "Just hold on," Lena whispered, her voice carrying the same controlled strength she once used to guide young dancers through difficult routines. Pine Hollow Veterinary Clinic emerged through the downpour, its lights a beacon in the gray afternoon. Lena parked haphazardly, gathered the box against her chest, and rushed inside, rainwater streaming from her silver hair down her face, indistinguishable from tears. "She collapsed this morning," she explained to the receptionist, who immediately ushered her into an examination room. "She wouldn't eat, and then she just fell over." The veterinarian arrived moments later, his gentle hands examining Maisie with practiced efficiency. Lena watched his face, recognizing the subtle shift in expression she'd seen too many times before, when her husband received his diagnosis, when her dance studio closed, when her daughter Grace stopped calling regularly. "I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore," he said finally, stepping back. "Her kidneys are failing, and at her age, you should prepare to say goodbye. Make her comfortable. It could be days, maybe a week." The words hung in the air like the thunder outside, expected but still devastating. Lena nodded mechanically, her dancer's posture never faltering even as something crumbled inside her. "Can I take her home?" "Of course. I can give you something for pain, but—" The vet trailed off, his professional compassion unable to soften the inevitable. Back home, Lena created a soft nest near the window, where Maisie had always loved to watch birds. The retired ballet instructor moved with deliberate grace, arranging blankets and placing water within easy reach. Outside, the storm intensified, mirroring the tempest in her heart. Maisie was more than a pet. After her husband passed and her children scattered across the country, after her body could no longer perform the art that defined her life, the small calico had remained constant. Now, watching the cat's shallow breathing, Lena confronted not just Maisie's mortality, but her own growing irrelevance. "We're not done yet," she whispered, stroking Maisie's fur with trembling fingers. "I promise you that." The empty house echoed around her. No students to teach, no husband to embrace, no daughter to call. Just Lena and her dying cat, while rain pounded against the windows of her mountain home, and darkness gathered both outside and within. Despite the veterinarian's resigned prognosis, something fierce and determined awakened in Lena's heart, a refusal to surrender to this final loss without a fight. The storm that had brought Lena Whitmore and Maisie to the Pine Hollow Veterinary Clinic earlier that day continued to rage through the evening. Thunder rattled the windows of her modest mountain home, each flash of lightning illuminating the living room where Lena sat vigil beside her ailing cat. Rain lashed against the roof in violent sheets, creating a chaotic symphony that matched her turbulent emotions. Maisie lay motionless in her makeshift bed, the same cardboard box that had served as her emergency transport. The elderly feline's breathing remained shallow, her once bright eyes now dull and unfocused. Lena stroked her companion's fur with gentle fingers, the vet's grim prognosis echoing in her mind. "I won't give up on you," she whispered, her ballet instructor's posture finally slumping with exhaustion. A particularly bright flash of lightning drew her attention to the window. Lena squinted through the rain-streaked glass, certain her tired mind was playing tricks. But as another bolt illuminated the night, she gasped. There, on her porch, stood a wild bobcat. The creature was magnificent despite its obvious distress. Ragged fur clung to a powerful frame, and Lena could see it favoring one leg, limping as it sought shelter from the downpour. Rather than the fear she should have felt at the sight of such a predator, something else stirred within her. A strange, inexplicable pull. "My God," she breathed, slowly rising to her feet. The bobcat turned its head, amber eyes meeting hers through the glass. Lena froze, transfixed by the animal's gaze. Unlike the skittish wildlife she occasionally glimpsed in the forests surrounding Sugarfern Ridge, this creature radiated an almost supernatural calm. It made no move to flee, instead regarding her with what seemed like curious intelligence. A soft sound broke the spell, a weak meow from behind her. Lena turned to see something that made her heart skip. Maisie had lifted her head. For the first time since her collapse, the frail cat had moved voluntarily, raising one paw toward the window as if reaching for the wild visitor. The bobcat tilted its head, its attention shifting from Lena to Maisie. The two felines locked eyes across the barrier of glass and species, communicating in a language Lena couldn't comprehend. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition, understanding, connection that transcended explanation. Lena watched, breathless, as her dying cat and the wounded predator regarded each other. The moment stretched, punctuated only by the storm's fury, until the bobcat finally lowered itself to the porch floor, curling up against the door as if it belonged there. A strange warmth bloomed in Lena's chest, displacing some of the day's despair. It wasn't rational. Nothing about this encounter made logical sense, but a tiny glimmer of hope kindled in her weary soul. Something extraordinary had just happened, something she couldn't explain but somehow understood was important. The morning after the bobcat's first appearance, Lena Whitmore found herself standing in her kitchen, knife in hand, cutting raw chicken into small pieces. She hadn't planned this. Her hands seemed to move of their own accord. The retired ballet instructor still possessed the precise movements that had defined her career, now redirected toward this unexpected task. "What am I doing?" she whispered to herself, but continued anyway. As dusk settled over the mountains of Sugar Fern Ridge, Lena placed a shallow bowl of water and the meat scraps on the far edge of her wooden porch. She retreated inside, dimming the lights and settling into her reading chair with a clear view of the offering. Hours passed. Just as sleep began to tug at her eyelids, a shadow moved at the forest's edge. The bobcat emerged, cautious and alert, its injured leg causing a pronounced limp. Lena held her breath as the wild animal approached the food, amber eyes constantly scanning for threats. "I'll call you Ash," she murmured, noting the ashen markings in the creature's tawny coat. From her cardboard box near the window, Maisie stirred. The elderly cat, barely responsive since her collapse, lifted her head slightly, her gaze fixed on the bobcat with an intensity that startled Lena. Something unspoken passed between the two felines, predator and house pet, separated by glass yet somehow connected. The next evening, Lena prepared another offering. This time, Ash arrived earlier, still cautious but less hesitant. The ritual continued night after night. Lena would leave food. Ash would come. Maisie would watch. By the fifth night, Lena noticed something remarkable. Maisie had moved from her box to the windowsill without assistance. The cat that the veterinarian had all but pronounced terminal was showing small but unmistakable signs of improvement. "This is impossible," Lena whispered to Miss Delilah over tea the following afternoon, careful to keep her voice low though no one else was present. "Maisie's eating again. She's moving around." The elderly Cherokee woman nodded thoughtfully. "The wild has its own medicine." Lena's scientific mind resisted such notions, but she couldn't deny the evidence before her eyes. Each night Ash appeared. Maisie seemed stronger. The house cat now waited eagerly at the window, sometimes pawing at the glass when the bobcat appeared. 2 weeks into their strange arrangement, Ash ventured closer to the house than ever before. The wild animal sat on the porch steps, staring directly at the window where Maisie watched. For nearly 10 minutes, they remained locked in silent communion before Ash disappeared back into the darkness. That night, Maisie purred for the first time in months. Lena's skepticism was crumbling. Whatever was happening defied explanation, but she couldn't deny the fragile hope taking root in her heart. Something extraordinary was unfolding on her mountain porch, something that challenged everything she thought she knew about life, death, and healing. The morning mist still clung to the mountainside when Miss Delilah Blackfeather appeared at Lena's doorstep, a basket of freshly picked blackberries in her weathered hands. The elderly Cherokee woman's eyes, sharp as ever despite her 87 years, immediately noticed the small bowl of raw meat scraps sitting near the porch steps. "You've got yourself a visitor, I see," Miss Delilah said, her voice carrying the gentle cadence of the mountains. She settled into the rocking chair beside Lena, their morning ritual of shared tea now infused with unspoken questions. Lena Whitmore hesitated, fingers nervously tracing the rim of her mug. "Just a bobcat, injured one, showed up a few nights ago during the storm." The herbalist nodded slowly, her silver braids catching the morning light. "And your Maisie? How is she faring now?" "Better, actually. She watches the bobcat every night from the window. It's the strangest thing," She seems stronger each morning." Miss Delilah fell silent, rocking gently as she studied the tree line. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of generations. "My grandmother used to tell stories about spirit animals that choose people in their darkest hours. The Cherokee believes some creatures cross the boundary between our world and the spirit realm when someone worthy needs guidance." "I named it Ash," Lena admitted, almost embarrassed by this confession. "Names have power," the older woman replied. "In our traditions, when an animal, especially one rarely seen, seeks you out during times of grief, it brings both blessing and trial. A test of sorts." Lena's practical nature bristled. "It's just looking for food, Delilah. There's nothing mystical about hunger." "Perhaps," Miss Delilah conceded with a knowing smile, "but these mountains hold secrets older than both of us. My people have stories of healing bonds between animals that science can't explain. The last bobcat sighting in Sugar Fern Ridge was over a decade ago, yet one appears precisely when your beloved companion is dying." The herbalist reached across and patted Lena's hand. "Just be mindful. Spirit guides don't come without purpose, and their gifts often require something in return." After Miss Delilah left, Lena found herself standing at the edge of her property, staring into the dense forest. The rational part of her mind dismissed the conversation as superstition, yet something deeper, perhaps the part of her that had spent 20 years in this mountain community, couldn't entirely reject the possibility. That night, as she watched Maisie perk up at Ash's arrival, Lena wondered if the connection between the two animals was mere coincidence or something woven into the fabric of Appalachian and Cherokee lore. The question followed her into dreams filled with moonlit forests and the golden eyes of creatures moving between worlds. Each evening as dusk settled over Sugar Fern Ridge, Maisie would drag her frail body to the living room window. Lena Whitmore watched in amazement as her cat, who had been at death's door just days ago, now seemed driven by an invisible force. The elderly feline would position herself on the windowsill, ears perked forward, eyes fixed on the porch where Ash would eventually appear. "It's the strangest thing I've ever seen," Lena confided to Miss Delilah over tea. "She barely ate for weeks, and now she's alert every evening, waiting for that bobcat." The Cherokee herbalist nodded knowingly, her weathered hands cradling her mug. "Animals understand things we've forgotten how to hear." When Lena took Maisie for her follow-up appointment, the veterinarian couldn't hide his astonishment. He examined the cat thoroughly, comparing notes with his previous diagnosis. "I don't understand it," he admitted, adjusting his glasses. "Her blood work is improving, and she's regained nearly a pound. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." Lena simply smiled, keeping Ash's nightly visits to herself. How could she explain something she barely understood? Word spread quickly through the small mountain community. At the general store, customers would lower their voices when Lena approached, their curious glances following her down the aisles. The retired ballet instructor found herself at the center of whispered conversations about mountain magic and healing creatures. "Is it true your cat was dying?" Sam's mother asked when they crossed paths at the post office. "People are saying she's made some miracle recovery." "Maisie is doing better," Lena replied carefully. "That's all I know for certain." But certainty was becoming a fluid concept in Lena's world. Each night she observed the silent communion between her house cat and the wild bobcat. Sometimes they would lock eyes for minutes, completely still, as if engaged in conversation beyond human comprehension. Even Grace called from the city, her scientific skepticism evident in her voice. "Mom, are you sure you're not just seeing what you want to see?" Cats don't just recover from kidney failure, yet Maisie continued to improve. Her fur regained its luster, her appetite returned, and she began moving with a grace that belied her advanced age. The cardboard box that had served as her sickbed now gathered dust in the corner. One evening, as rain pattered against the windows, Lena sat in her armchair watching the pair. Maisie pressed a paw against the glass, and Ash mirrored the gesture from the porch. Something passed between them, something ancient and wordless. In that moment, Lena's last shred of skepticism dissolved. Whatever was happening between these two creatures transcended her understanding, but she no longer needed to explain it. She simply needed to witness it. The dawn light painted Sugar Fern Ridge in hues of amber and gold as Lena Whitmore stepped onto her porch with Maisie's breakfast. She paused, surprised to see Ash already waiting. The bobcat's fur glowed copper in the morning sun, her injured leg held slightly aloft as always. But something was different today. Instead of accepting the offering and settling into her usual spot, Ash took the meat and limped toward the tree line. At the forest's edge, the wild cat stopped. She turned her head, amber eyes locking with Lena's in a gaze that felt almost human. The animal waited, glancing between Lena and the dense woods beyond. "What is it?" Lena whispered, her ballet instructor's posture straightening instinctively. "Do you want me to follow you?" As if in answer, Ash took a few steps forward, then paused again, looking back expectantly. Lena hesitated. Following a wild animal into the forest went against every rational thought she'd ever had. Yet something in the bobcat's demeanor spoke of urgency and purpose. Through the window, Maisie watched intently, tail twitching with unusual energy. "I must be losing my mind," Lena muttered, grabbing her cardigan and slipping on her walking shoes. Heart pounding, she followed the limping creature into the woods. The forest floor felt springy beneath her feet, decades of fallen pine needles cushioning each step. Ash moved with surprising speed despite her injury, navigating the undergrowth with practiced ease. They traveled deeper than Lena had ventured in years, pushing through thickets of mountain laurel and rhododendron. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she ducked beneath low-hanging branches and scrambled over fallen logs. The retired dancer's muscles protested, yet she pressed on, drawn by curiosity and an inexplicable sense of trust. After 20 minutes of difficult terrain, the trees suddenly opened into a small clearing. Lena gasped. Before her lay a steaming hot spring, its surface reflecting the morning light in ripples of silver and blue. Around the water's edge grew clusters of plants she'd never seen before, delicate purple flowers, feathery ferns, and herbs with leaves that seemed to shimmer with dew. The sharp, clean scent of pine mingled with earthy mineral steam from the spring. Ash approached the water's edge and drank, then settled on a sun-warmed rock, watching Lena with calm expectation. "This is incredible," she whispered, turning slowly to take in the hidden grove. "How has no one found this place?" The clearing felt ancient, protected somehow from time and intrusion. No footpaths led here, no candy wrappers or evidence of human visitors marred its perfection. It existed in pristine isolation, as if waiting specifically for this moment. Drawn by instinct, Lena knelt beside a cluster of the unfamiliar herbs. Their leaves felt velvety beneath her fingers, releasing a subtle, sweet aroma. Without fully understanding why, she carefully gathered a small handful, knowing somehow they were meant for Maisie. Lena Whitmore clutched the unfamiliar plants to her chest as she hurried home, their earthy scent mingling with the pine-fresh mountain air. She placed them carefully on her kitchen counter, examining the delicate leaves and vibrant stems with curious fingers. Something about these plants felt different, almost alive with possibility. That afternoon, Miss Delilah's knock came right on time. The elderly herbalist's eyes widened when she spotted the collection. "Where did you find these?" she asked, her weathered hands hovering reverently over the greenery. "In a hidden grove," Lena replied. "Ash led me there." Miss Delilah picked up a sprig with purple-tinged leaves. "This is ghost flower. Haven't seen it growing wild in 30 years. She lifted another plant with star-shaped blooms. "And this is thunderroot. These aren't just any plants, Lena. These are sacred medicines." The Cherokee woman sat heavily in a kitchen chair, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. "There are stories passed down through generations about healing springs that remain hidden from human eyes. They reveal themselves only to those the forest chooses." She fixed Lena with an intense gaze. "The bobcat brought you there for a reason." Lena felt a chill despite the warmth of her kitchen. "What should I do with them?" "I'll show you," the older woman said. Under Miss Delilah's guidance, Lena learned to prepare teas from the thunderroot and poultices from the ghost flower. They worked together at the kitchen table, the herbalist's hands moving with practiced precision as she taught Lena the ancient methods. "A little in her water each morning," she instructed. "The poultice goes on her chest while she sleeps." That evening, as Lena applied the fragrant paste to Maisie's fur, the cat purred, a sound she hadn't made in weeks. By morning, her beloved pet was sitting up, eyes brighter than they'd been since before her collapse. Over the next few days, Maisie's transformation accelerated. She began eating without coaxing, then walking around the house, and finally jumping onto windowsills again. The local vet called it unexplainable, but Lena knew better. Each night, as Ash appeared on the porch, Maisie would sit at the window, their gazes locked in silent communion. Lena found herself caught between worlds, the rational explanations she'd always trusted and the mysterious connection unfolding before her eyes. "With knowledge comes responsibility," Miss Delilah had warned. "The forest has shared its secrets with you. Watching Maisie grow stronger by the day, Lena felt the weight of that gift. She began keeping a journal, documenting each herb and its effects, each visit from Ash, each improvement in Maisie's condition. The boundary between science and magic blurred, leaving Lena standing at a threshold she never expected to cross, filled with both wonder and profound responsibility. The knock came just after sunset. Lena Whitmore opened her door to find Grace standing there, suitcase in hand, the evening breeze ruffling her dark hair. Mother and daughter regarded each other with the cautious politeness of distant acquaintances rather than family. "Your message sounded urgent," Grace said, stepping inside. Her eyes, analytical and searching, scanned the living room. "Something about Maisie making a miraculous recovery?" Lena nodded, suddenly aware of how fantastical her hurried phone call must have sounded to her scientist daughter. The vet gave her days to live. Now look at her. As if on cue, Maisie trotted into the room, her gait steady and purposeful, a far cry from the limp, barely breathing creature of 2 weeks prior. Grace's professional composure cracked, her eyebrows rising in genuine surprise. "That's remarkable," she murmured, crouching to examine the elderly cat. "What treatment protocol did they put her on?" Lena hesitated. How could she explain Miss Delilah's herbs or the nightly visits from a wild bobcat without sounding like she'd lost her mind? "It's complicated." That night, as they shared an awkward dinner of reheated stew, the weight of unspoken years hung between them. Grace peppered her mother with clinical questions about Maisie's symptoms and recovery, while carefully avoiding any mention of the 5 years since her last visit. "You never were one for conventional wisdom," Grace finally said, her tone hovering between criticism and reluctant admiration. "Dad always said that was your best and worst quality." Lena's hand stilled over her teacup. "There's a lot about your father you never understood." "There's a lot about you I never understood either," Grace replied softly. The conversation might have devolved into familiar territory, tense silences and careful retreats, if not for Maisie suddenly leaping onto the windowsill, her tail swishing with excitement. Outside, Ash had appeared on the porch, his wounded leg less pronounced than before. "Is that a bobcat?" Grace whispered, rising slowly from her chair. "That's Ash," Lena said simply. "He comes every night." For the first time in years, Lena saw genuine wonder replace the skepticism in her daughter's eyes. They stood shoulder to shoulder at the window, watching as Maisie pawed at the glass, seemingly communicating with the wild creature beyond. "This defies everything I understand about feline behavior," Grace whispered. "Some things can't be understood, only witnessed," Lena replied. As the days passed, Maisie's continuing recovery became a shared project. Grace documented changes in the cat's vitality with scientific precision, while Lena prepared Miss Delilah's herbal remedies. They circled each other carefully, these two women bound by blood, but separated by perspective, finding in Maisie's resilience a neutral ground where both science and wonder could coexist. The rain had been relentless for 3 days straight, saturating the ancient slopes of Sugar Fern Ridge until the earth could hold no more. Lena Whitmore was awakened by a sound like distant thunder, but the rumbling didn't stop. She clutched Maisie to her chest as the landslide tore through the eastern edge of their mountain community, taking with it homes, roads, and the certainty of tomorrow. By morning, the devastation was clear. 5 families had lost everything, roads were impassable, and the small town's resources were stretched thin. Among those affected was Sam, the quiet teenager from 2 properties down whose wildlife photography Lena had admired from afar. His parents were stranded in the next county, unable to return with the main road washed away. "You'll stay with me until they can get back," Lena told him, brooking no argument as she watched him stand in the rain, clutching his camera bag and his golden retriever's leash. The boy's eyes were red-rimmed but dry, his shoulders hunched against more than just the weather. That first night Sam barely spoke, just whispered "thank you" when Lena showed him to the spare room. His dog, Rusty, curled protectively at his feet while Maisie watched from her perch on the windowsill, tail twitching with curiosity rather than alarm. By the 3rd day, a routine emerged. Sam would rise early, helping Lena feed the animals before taking Rusty for a careful exploration of the undamaged forest paths. In the afternoons, he would sit quietly at her kitchen table, sorting through his photographs while she prepared meals or canned the last of her garden's harvest. "My grandmother used to can tomatoes just like that," he commented one evening, the first voluntary words he'd offered. His voice cracked slightly, and Lena recognized the ache of displacement in his eyes. After dinner, they settled into a rhythm of quiet companionship. Lena shared stories of her ballet students from years past, while Sam gradually revealed his dreams of becoming a wildlife biologist. Even Maisie seemed to thrive in this expanded household, her strength visibly improving as she divided her attention between watching for Ash through the window and investigating Sam's shoelaces. "I've never seen a cat recover like this," Sam observed, gently stroking Maisie's fur as she purred against his leg. "It's almost like she's getting younger instead of older." The disaster that had torn through their community had, paradoxically, stitched something new together in Lena's home. The warmth of shared meals, the comfort of evening stories, and the quiet understanding between a lonely woman, a displaced boy, and their animal companions filled her house with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since closing her dance studio years ago. When Ash appeared on the porch that night, Sam's eyes widened in wonder. Lena simply smiled and whispered. "Some things can't be explained, only experienced." Grace was sorting through a stack of old magazines when the envelope slipped out. Yellowed at the edges, it bore her name in her mother's elegant script, a letter never sent. She glanced toward the kitchen where Lena Whitmore was preparing tea, unaware of what her daughter had discovered. "Mom?" Grace called, her voice catching. "What's this?" Lena turned, the color draining from her face when she saw the envelope in her daughter's hands. "That's private," she whispered, but made no move to take it away. Grace hesitated, then carefully opened the letter. The paper crackled beneath her fingers as she began to read words written 3 years earlier, after her father's funeral. "My dearest Grace," it began, "the studio closed today. 28 years of teaching ballet, of watching little girls grow into confident women, gone in an afternoon. The building will become a coffee shop." I stood in the empty room with its mirrors reflecting nothing but ghosts, and thought, this is how invisible I've become. The scientist in Grace wanted to analyze, to dissect, but emotion overwhelmed logic. Her mother's words continued, detailing how the emptiness of the house echoed her internal void, how Maisie had become her only consistent companion, how she feared being forgotten by her own children. "I don't know how to tell you I'm afraid," the letter concluded, "afraid of disappearing completely. Your father knew how to reach you. I never learned." Grace looked up, tears blurring her vision. Lena stood in the doorway, her hands trembling slightly. "Why didn't you send it?" Grace asked. "Pride," Lena replied simply. "Fear. I didn't want to burden you with an aging mother's melancholy." The silence between them felt different now, not the practiced distance of years, but something fragile and new. Grace rose from the floor, letter still in hand. "I thought you were strong," she said. "I thought you didn't need me." Lena shook her head. "I've always needed you. I just didn't know how to say it." Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the windows of the mountain home. Inside, mother and daughter faced each other across years of misunderstanding. "I'm sorry," Grace said, taking a step forward, "for not seeing." "And I'm sorry for not showing," Lena responded. When they embraced, it was awkward at first, two people remembering how to fit together, but as the embrace lingered, something calcified began to soften. In the window seat nearby, Maisie watched them with half-closed eyes, purring softly as if in approval. That night, they talked until dawn, about loss and fear, about science and magic, about the strange bobcat that had changed everything. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, not yet, but it was a beginning. The first snow of December fell silently over Sugar Fern Ridge, blanketing Lena Whitmore's porch in pristine white, a porch that had remained empty for 23 nights. Ash had vanished without a trace, taking with her the magic that had seemed to pulse through Lena's small mountain home. "Come on, girl. Just a little more," Lena whispered, cradling Maisie in her lap. The elderly cat had stopped eating 3 days ago, her eyes growing cloudy and distant. The remarkable recovery that had astonished even the local veterinarian was unraveling before Lena's eyes, thread by fragile thread. Each evening she still placed a small bowl of meat at the edge of her property, watching through frosted windows, as snowflakes collected atop the untouched offering. Each morning she disposed of it, her heart sinking further. Maybe it was just coincidence, Grace had suggested during their last phone call, her scientist's skepticism resurfacing. Wild animals migrate, follow food sources. The bobcat probably moved on to better hunting grounds. But Lena knew better. Something had happened to Ash, something that now threatened Maisie as well. The retired ballet instructor moved through her days with mechanical precision, her former grace giving way to a heaviness that seemed to pull at her bones. Miss Delilah brought over herbal teas and sat with her, speaking softly of patience and cycles, but even the Cherokee herbalist's wisdom offered little comfort. "The forest has its own time," the elderly woman reminded her. "Trust what you've seen." Trust was becoming harder to hold on to, especially with the news that swept through town like wildfire. A developer from Charlotte had arrived in Sugar Fern Ridge, staying at the only bed and breakfast in town while making grand promises to the cash-strapped county commissioners. "Luxury eco-resort," Sam explained when he stopped by with more wildlife photographs. The young neighbor's face was pinched with worry. "They're talking about buying up 500 acres, including the Eastern Ridge." The Eastern Ridge, where Lena had followed Ash to the hidden spring, where the healing plants grew, where magic still lived in the ancient soil. "They can't," she whispered, stroking Maisie's bony spine. "They're saying it'll bring jobs," Sam continued, his camera hanging unused around his neck. "But what about the animals? What about Ash and her territory?" That night, as wind howled around the eaves of her home, Lena sat by the window, Maisie's frail body curled against her chest. Beyond the glass, the forest stood dark and impenetrable, its secrets buried beneath snow and shadow. For the first time since the Bobcat had appeared on her porch, Lena felt truly alone. She pressed her palm against the cold window, a silent prayer forming on her lips. She was losing everything. Maisie, Ash, and now perhaps even the sacred landscape that had become her sanctuary. The whispers began at Maggie's diner, spreading through Sugar Fern Ridge like wildfire. Lena Whitmore overheard two council members discussing development opportunities while she picked up her morning coffee. Their hushed tones and furtive glances told her everything she needed to know. "They're selling our forest," Martha, the waitress, confirmed later that day. "That developer from Charlotte's been meeting with the mayor after hours. No public notices, nothing." Lena clutched her mug tighter, feeling the weight of this news settle in her chest. For days, she'd been wrestling with Maisie's declining health since Ash's disappearance. Now this threat loomed over the very land that had brought such unexpected healing. "What are you going to do about it?" Martha asked, refilling her cup. The question haunted Lena all the way home. Her instinct, honed by years of quiet solitude after her husband's passing, was to retreat into her mountain home and let others fight this battle. Yet something had shifted inside her since Ash's arrival. The forest had chosen her, as Miss Delilah might say. That evening Sam knocked on her door, his young face flushed with excitement despite the troubling news circulating through town. "I've been meaning to show you something," he said, carefully placing his laptop on her kitchen table. His dog settled at his feet while he pulled up a folder labeled Night Visitors. Lena gasped at what appeared on screen. Sam had set up a motion-activated camera on the edge of her property weeks ago. The footage showed Ash approaching Maisie's window, their faces separated only by glass. The wild bobcat pressed her forehead against the pane, while Maisie mirrored the gesture from inside. "I've never seen anything like it," Sam said, scrolling through dozens of similar interactions. "It's like they're communicating somehow." The young photographer showed her more clips, Ash bringing a small branch of the medicinal herbs to the porch, Maisie responding with visible improvement the following days. "People need to see this," Lena whispered, more to herself than to Sam. "That's what I thought too," he replied, "especially now, with that developer wanting to bulldoze everything." Lena stared at the images, remembering Miss Delilah's words about spirit animals and chosen people. The rational part of her mind still questioned the connection, but the evidence before her eyes was undeniable. "These woods aren't just trees and dirt," Sam continued, his passion evident. "They're alive in ways most people have forgotten." Something resolved in Lena's heart as she watched the silent communion between wild and domestic, between nature and home. The forest had given her a gift. Perhaps it was time to return the favor. "Make copies," she told Sam, her voice finding new strength. "I think I know how to save our forest." The town hall was packed to capacity, the air thick with tension and the scent of rain-damp coats. Lena Whitmore sat in the back row, her hands trembling slightly as the developer unveiled glossy renderings of the proposed luxury resort. She watched her neighbors' faces, some eager for promised jobs, others clouded with concern for their beloved forest. When the floor opened for comments, Lena surprised herself by standing. Her ballet instructor's posture returned instinctively as she made her way to the microphone, feeling every eye in the room follow her movement. I've lived in Sugarfern Ridge for 37 years, she began, her voice soft but steady, and I've never spoken at a meeting before. But something extraordinary has happened that I can't keep to myself anymore. The room fell silent as Lena recounted her story, Maisie's near death, Ash's mysterious appearance, and the miraculous recovery that defied medical explanation. She described the hidden spring and the healing herbs, careful to omit its exact location. What's happening in our forest isn't just about trees and land, she continued, gaining confidence. It's about connections we've forgotten. Miss Delilah's ancestors understood this. The Cherokee knew that animals could be messengers, that the land itself holds healing we can't explain with science alone. From the middle rows, Dr. Patterson, the veterinarian who had gently prepared her for Maisie's end, leaned forward, his skepticism visibly wavering. I'm not asking you to believe in magic, Lena said, meeting his gaze. I'm asking you to consider what we might lose forever if we don't protect this place. The developer stood up, smoothly interrupting. While Mrs. Whitmore's cat story is touching, we're discussing economic growth and property values. It's Miss Whitmore, she corrected him quietly, and I'm discussing our heritage. Our responsibility. Several elderly residents nodded in agreement. Sam, sitting near the front with his camera, gave her a thumbs up. After the meeting, Dr. Patterson approached Lena as she gathered her things. I've been practicing veterinary medicine for 22 years, he said, his professional detachment softening. Maisie's case defies everything I know about feline cardiac failure. I dismissed it as a misdiagnosis, but, Lena prompted, I'd like to document her recovery properly. Perhaps there's something in animal behavior, in their instinctive connections, that we've overlooked. As they talked, Miss Delilah joined them, her weathered hand resting on Lena's arm. The forest chooses its advocates carefully, she murmured. You spoke well tonight. Walking home under starlight, Lena felt something shift inside her, a quiet certainty replacing decades of hesitation. Whatever came next, she had found her voice, and with it, a purpose that extended far beyond her porch and the bobcat that had changed everything. The first light of dawn crept through Lena's kitchen window. As she stirred honey into her tea, the bitter weeks of Ash's absence weighing on her shoulders. Maisie lay curled in her basket, breathing shallow and weak again. The cat's brief improvement had faded like morning mist, leaving Lena to wonder if she'd imagined the entire connection between her dying pet and the wild bobcat. A soft thump on the porch made her freeze. Setting down her mug, Lena approached the window with cautious hope. There, illuminated in the golden morning light, stood Ash, her familiar silhouette now accompanied by two tiny, wobbly forms. Bobcat cubs, no larger than small rabbits, tumbled around their mother's paws. Grace! Lena called, her voice cracking. Come quickly! Her daughter appeared in the doorway, hair disheveled from sleep. The scientist's eyes widened as she took in the scene. That's impossible, Grace whispered. Bobcats never bring their young near humans. Yet there they were, Ash standing tall despite her lingering limp, proudly presenting her family to Lena. From her basket across the room, Maisie lifted her head, ears perked forward. The elderly cat rose on unsteady legs, then actually walked, to the window, pressing her nose against the glass. Look at her, Lena breathed. She's walking again. Over the next 3 days, Maisie's transformation astonished even the local vet, who drove out to witness it himself. The cat's appetite returned, her fur regained its luster, and her eyes cleared. Meanwhile, Ash brought her cubs to the porch each morning, allowing them to play while she kept watchful guard. Word spread through Sugarfern Ridge like wildfire. Cars began appearing along Lena's driveway as townsfolk came to glimpse the miracle for themselves. Miss Delilah smiled knowingly when she visited, touching Lena's hand. The forest has chosen you, she said simply. Grace, ever the researcher, set up cameras and began documenting the interactions, measuring Maisie's vital signs, and collecting samples of the herbs from the hidden grove, which had burst into vibrant bloom with the arrival of spring. I'm submitting this as a case study, she told Lena one evening. The university won't believe it without evidence. Even Mayor Thompson, who had loudly dismissed the bobcat nonsense at the town hall meeting, fell silent when he witnessed Ash nursing her cubs while Maisie watched from the window, their eyes locked in mysterious communion. There are things in these mountains, Miss Delilah told the gathered crowd, that science is only beginning to understand. As April turned to May, Lena's home became a place of pilgrimage. not just for the curious, but for those seeking hope. And Maisie, once at death's door, now sat regally in the window, fully restored, a living testament to mysteries no one could explain. The sun filtered through the curtains of Lena's kitchen as Miss Delilah sat across from her, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of pine needle tea. The elderly Cherokee woman's weathered face seemed to hold more shadows than usual as she leaned forward. "I've never told anyone this," Miss Delilah whispered, her voice like autumn leaves rustling. 52 years ago, when my husband passed, I thought I would die from grief. Then a bobcat appeared on my porch, just like your Ash." Lena's breath caught. "What happened?" "The bobcat led me to healing plants I'd never seen before. My heart mended in ways medicine couldn't explain." The herbalist reached across the table and clasped Lena's hand. "Our mountains have always known things we don't." Miss Delilah closed her eyes and began to chant softly in Cherokee, the ancient syllables filling the kitchen with something both heavy and light. "This is the song of binding," she explained afterward. "It connects the worthy to the strength of the forest. My grandmother taught it to me, and now I pass it to you." Lena practiced the unfamiliar sounds until Miss Delilah nodded with approval. The weight of this gift, this responsibility, settled on her shoulders like a mantle. That afternoon, Dr. Parker from Pine Hollow Veterinary Clinic arrived at Lena's doorstep, clipboard in hand and curiosity in his eyes. The veterinarian had initially dismissed Maisie's recovery as coincidence, but now he studied the cat with undisguised wonder. "I've consulted with colleagues at 3 universities," he admitted, watching Maisie stretch luxuriously on the windowsill. "No one can explain it. Would you consider allowing us to document her case? This could challenge everything we understand about animal healing." Maisie purred loudly, as if offering her own opinion on the matter. "What would that involve?" Lena asked cautiously. "Interviews? Medical examinations? Perhaps some observation of your visitor?" The vet glanced toward the porch where Ash sometimes appeared. Grace entered from the garden, soil under her fingernails and skepticism in her stance. "Mom, are you sure? This could bring a lot of attention." Lena felt pulled between worlds. Miss Delilah's sacred traditions that demanded protection and secrecy, and modern science that sought to understand and share. Both paths held truth. Both deserved respect. "I need time to think," she finally said, stroking Maisie's fur. The cat blinked slowly at her, seeming to understand the complexity of her position. As the vet departed, Lena stood on her porch, the Cherokee chant humming in her memory. Science and tradition were converging in her simple mountain home, and somehow she had become their unlikely keeper. The responsibility terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. Grace's scientific curiosity had been piqued beyond measure. The morning after Lena had shared her secret about the hidden spring, the 2 women set out at dawn, hiking boots crunching through the dewy undergrowth. Grace clutched her smartphone, determined to document what her mother had discovered. "I still can't believe you followed a wild bobcat into these woods," Grace murmured, ducking beneath a low-hanging branch. "That's not exactly the cautious ballet teacher I remember." Lena smiled, her step sure and graceful despite the uneven terrain. Sometimes life asks us to dance to a different rhythm. When they reached the clearing, Grace gasped. The hot spring shimmered in the morning light, surrounded by clusters of rare medicinal plants. Steam rose in delicate spirals as sunlight filtered through the canopy above. Grace immediately began photographing everything: the crystalline water, the unusual herbs, the distinctive rock formations. "This is extraordinary," she whispered, kneeling to examine a patch of vibrant green plants. "Some of these species shouldn't even grow in this region." The university would go crazy over this discovery. Lena watched her daughter with mixed emotions, understanding the scientific value but feeling protective of the sacred space that had helped save Maisie. 3 days later, armed with detailed coordinates and Grace's meticulous photographs, they returned to show the spring to Miss Delilah. But where the clearing had been, they found only dense forest and an impenetrable wall of fog that seemed to shift and swirl whenever they approached. "I don't understand," Grace said, checking her device repeatedly. "We're in exactly the right spot. The GPS confirms it." Lena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "Maybe it doesn't want to be found." Miss Delilah nodded sagely. "The old stories say the healing places reveal themselves only to those in need, or those guided by forest spirits." Grace scoffed. though her scientific certainty was visibly shaken. "That's not possible." As if in answer to her doubt, a familiar shape emerged from the mist. Ash, moving with more fluidity now, her limp less pronounced. The bobcat regarded them with amber eyes before turning to walk along the edge of the fog. "She wants us to follow," Lena said softly. With Ash leading the way, the mist parted like a curtain, revealing the spring once more. Grace stood speechless, her worldview tilting on its axis as she watched the wild cat pause at the water's edge. "Some knowledge isn't meant to be mapped or measured," Miss Delilah said gently. "Some wisdom belongs to the wild." In that moment, Lena understood the delicate balance she now inhabited, between revealing and protecting, between human curiosity and natural mystery. The spring and its healing herbs had become more than a discovery. They were a sacred trust, accessible only through the grace of the forest and its enigmatic guardian. Sam's hands trembled as he spread the photographs across Lena's kitchen table. "I was organizing my wildlife portfolio when I noticed something," he said, pointing to a close-up of Ash. The image captured the bobcat in profile, her hind leg bearing a distinctive scar pattern that wrapped around the joint. Lena Whitmore leaned closer, adjusting her reading glasses. "I always wondered about her limp, but I never saw the wound clearly." The retired ballet instructor traced her finger over the photograph, her stomach tightening as she recognized the telltale marks. "That's from a trap," Miss Delilah said quietly from the doorway. The elderly Cherokee herbalist moved to the table with deliberate steps. "Steel jaw, most likely. Illegal in these parts for over 15 years. Grace picked up another photo, her scientific training evident in her methodical examination. "The scar tissue suggests this happened years ago. She's lucky she didn't lose the leg entirely." The four of them fell silent, the only sound coming from Maisie's contented purring as she lounged in a patch of sunlight. The cat had made a full recovery, her eyes occasionally drifting toward the window, as if expecting her wild friend. "Who would set traps in protected forest?" Lena asked, anger rising in her voice. Miss Delilah's weathered face hardened. "Remember those acres that were cleared near Blackberry Creek about 8 years back? That developer, Harrington, had plans for a hunting lodge before the permits fell through." Sam nodded vigorously. "My dad worked surveying that land. He quit when he found out Harrington was having traps set to clear out predators before construction. The same Harrington who's trying to buy up the land for the resort now," Grace added, connecting the dots. Lena felt a surge of protective fury. The developer hadn't just threatened the forest's future, he'd already wounded one of its most magnificent creatures. "We need to tell everyone." Within days, Sam's photographs were displayed at the general store, the diner, and even the Pine Hollow Veterinary Clinic. The vet confirmed the injury was consistent with a trap wound, adding professional credibility to their discovery. The revelation transformed the town's resistance. What had been a divided issue became a unified cause. Even those who had favored the economic benefits of the resort couldn't stomach the developer's callous methods. Lena found herself at the center of organizing meetings, her quiet voice growing stronger with each retelling of Ash's story. The bobcat's resilience, surviving a cruel trap to later help Maisie heal, resonated deeply with the townsfolk of Sugarfern Ridge. "I never thought I'd be standing up to someone like Harrington," Lena confessed to Miss Delilah one evening as they watched Ash and her cubs from the porch. The older woman smiled. "The forest chose its defender well," she said, squeezing Lena's hand. "Some wounds heal stronger than before they were broken." The morning of the festival dawned with golden light streaming through the trees surrounding Sugarfern Ridge. Lena Whitmore stood at the edge of the festival grounds, clipboard in hand, her ballet instructor's discipline evident in how she orchestrated the chaos into harmony. What had begun as a desperate idea 3 weeks ago had blossomed into the town's largest gathering in years. "The banners need to go higher," she called to volunteers, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once guided dancers across stages. "We want them visible from the road." Sam darted between clusters of people, camera in hand, documenting everything. The boy had transformed his wildlife photographs into a stunning exhibition beneath a canopy of oak trees. His images of Ash, limping across Lena's porch, watching Maisie through the window, leading her cubs through moonlit grass, told a story more powerful than any speech. "These are extraordinary," a state conservation officer remarked, leaning close to examine a particularly striking shot of the bobcat. "We haven't had confirmed sightings in this area for over a decade." Grace had set up her own booth nearby, her scientific posters detailing Maisie's recovery alongside charts tracking the correlation between the cat's health and Ash's visits. The scientist and her daughter still sought rational explanations, but Lena noticed how Grace's language had softened, leaving room for wonder alongside analysis. "Mom," Grace called, waving Lena over. "The university research team just arrived. They're fascinated by the medicinal properties of those plants you found." At noon, Miss Delilah gathered everyone into a circle at the heart of the festival. The elderly Cherokee herbalist wore her finest dress, adorned with beadwork that caught the light as she moved. Silence fell as she began a traditional blessing, her voice rising and falling in ancient rhythms that seemed to make the very air vibrate. "We honor what has always been here," the elder spoke when the chant ended. "The forest remembers those who remember it." As twilight approached, local musicians played while children darted between quilting circles where elders shared stories of the land. Lena watched reporters interviewing townsfolk about the developers' plans and the community's resistance. What had begun as her private miracle had become a rallying point for the entire town. "You've done something remarkable," the veterinarian told her, pausing beside Lena as she surveyed the festival. "You've reminded everyone what we stand to lose." Lena shook her head. "It wasn't me. It was Ash and Maisie." She glanced toward home where her cat waited by the window. "They showed us what we weren't seeing." As night fell, lanterns illuminated the gathering. Lena felt a quiet certainty settle in her bones. Whatever happened tomorrow, today they had reclaimed something precious. The forest, and all who called it home, would not be forgotten. The final day of the Forest Festival dawned with an unusual clarity. Hundreds of Sugar Fern Ridge residents gathered on the festival grounds, their faces illuminated with anticipation. Lena Whitmore stood near the makeshift stage, her weathered hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the microphone. Grace squeezed her mother's shoulder reassuringly while Sam finished setting up his wildlife photography display nearby. "I never thought I'd be standing here," Lena began, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "But sometimes life's greatest miracles come when we've lost all hope." As she recounted Maisie's miraculous recovery and her encounters with Ash, a collective gasp rippled through the audience. At the edge of the clearing, movement caught everyone's attention. Time seemed to freeze as Ash emerged from the tree line, her sleek form no longer bearing the pronounced limp. Behind her, two small cubs tumbled into view, their spotted coats gleaming in the midday sun. "Nobody move," whispered Miss Delilah, her aged eyes wide with wonder. The bobcat paused, surveying the gathered humans with alert amber eyes. Then, defying every wild instinct, she padded deliberately toward Lena. The crowd drew back instinctively, creating a reverent path. Cameras clicked frantically as phones were raised to capture the impossible moment. Lena remained perfectly still, tears streaming down her face as Ash approached. The bobcat stopped just 3 feet away, her cubs hiding behind her powerful legs. For 30 breathtaking seconds, woman and wild creature regarded each other in profound silence. "It's a sign," Miss Delilah announced, her voice breaking with emotion. "The forest has chosen its protector." The developer, who had been standing at the back with his lawyers, visibly paled. As if on cue, the state conservation officer stepped forward, his expression transformed from skepticism to awe. "I've been working with wildlife for 25 years, he declared loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This behavior is unprecedented. This habitat must be protected." Ash dipped her head once, almost like a boo, before turning and shepherding her cubs back toward the forest. The entire assembly remained motionless until the bobcat family disappeared into the undergrowth. By sunset, the developer had withdrawn his proposal. By week's end, the county commissioners had unanimously voted to establish a protected wilderness area encompassing the hidden spring and surrounding forest. Local newspapers ran front-page stories featuring Sam's extraordinary photographs of the encounter. "Some call it a miracle," Grace told a reporter, her scientific skepticism softened by what she had witnessed. "All I know is that my mother saw something in that bobcat that changed everything." For Lena, who had once felt invisible in her own community, the miracle wasn't just Ash's appearance. It was finding her voice again, and with it, her place in the world. The morning sun painted Sugar Fern Ridge in golden light as Lena Whitmore stood on her porch, watching the forest come alive. Maisie purred contentedly in her arms, her coat glossy and her eyes bright with renewed vitality. The cat that veterinarians had once given up for dead now embodied resilience itself. "I never thought I'd see this day," Lena whispered, stroking Maisie's fur. The forest preservation agreement had been signed yesterday. permanently protecting the land from development. The wealthy resort developer had withdrawn his plans after the footage of Ash approaching Lena at the festival went viral, drawing attention from conservation groups across the country. Inside, Grace moved about the kitchen, preparing breakfast. Her scientific mind still struggled with what she had witnessed, but her heart had made peace with the mystery. She had called her university yesterday, extending her leave of absence for another month. "Mom," Grace called through the screen door, "Miss Delilah will be here in an hour." Lena nodded, savoring the word "mom" on her daughter's lips. Their relationship, once fractured by silence and distance, had found healing in the shadow of Maisie's recovery and Ash's appearance. The unsent letter, now framed on Grace's bedside table, had become a bridge rather than a barrier. The townspeople of Sugarfern Ridge no longer saw Lena as just the retired ballet instructor who lived alone on the mountain. She had become something more, a storyteller, a protector, a connector between worlds. Sam visited almost daily, his camera always ready, his young eyes eager to capture the magic that adults often missed. That afternoon, Miss Delilah arrived carrying a small wooden box. The elderly Cherokee herbalist moved with deliberate grace as she settled onto the porch swing. "It's time," she said simply, opening the box to reveal a small leather pouch and a scroll of birch bark. "These have been in my family for 7 generations. The chant must be spoken under the new moon, when the veil between worlds thins." Lena accepted the items with trembling hands. "I don't know if I'm worthy. The forest chose you," Miss Delilah replied. "Ash chose you. That's all the worthiness you need." As twilight descended, they spotted movement at the forest's edge. Ash appeared with her cubs, their silhouettes sharp against the darkening trees. The bobcat paused, amber eyes finding Lena's across the distance. "She's saying goodbye," Grace whispered, standing beside her mother. Lena nodded, tears blurring her vision. "No, not goodbye. See you later." As summer bloomed fully around them, Lena found herself no longer afraid of invisibility or irrelevance. She had become a keeper of stories, a guardian of wild things, a bridge between generations. Maisie stretched contentedly in her lap as Ash and her cubs melted into the emerald shadows. Not gone, but simply dwelling in the space where magic and reality intertwine.